We are your home theater and AV questions answered. This is AVRant. Want your home theater or AV question answered by Tom and Rob? Send it to question@avrant.com. Welcome to another edition of AVRant. I'm Tom Andrew, and I'm here with
Rob H. This is AVRant. It's your home theater and AV questions answered. So welcome back, Tom, even though he wasn't away last week. It was just scheduling snafus that didn't allow us both to be here at the same time. And thank you to Lee Overstreet for filling in as our guest co-host last week. Yeah, that all turned out okay. I know, yeah. The guy who handles our complaints. That's...
Oh, our customer service representative.
That's right.
Yeah, so this podcast might be short. I know
okay.
you guys went long last week because you always do whenever I'm not around, but I hurt my back last week.
Oh,
I did this a couple of months ago.
Yeah.
Where I was in the, I don't know. I think I'm going to have to go to some sort of physical therapy because it shouldn't happen more than once. Like, I was working in a weird position, kind of like bent over, sort of like tweaked. And then my back started hurting, and it started hurting more, and started hurting more, and started hurting more. So last time what I did is I went to my doctor, and they said, just take all of the anti-inflammatory medicine at home. Like, just take it for a couple of days straight until it just knocks all of the inflammation down as much as it can so that your back can kind of like reset. Huh. And that worked. Yeah. So that's what I'm doing right now. It has the unfortunate effect of giving me very IBS-like symptoms.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, when you take like a ton of Advil, that's really bad for your guts usually. So
it's not great. It's not great.
Yeah.
So if I suddenly disappear from the podcast for a period of time,
yeah.
Let's just not think about what's going on. I gotta go get some more water. That's all. I'm just getting some water. That's all I'm doing. But I am also still. Like, last night was the worst. I got home from work, and I was like, I'm going to take a shower. I couldn't take a shower. I just had to lie down and then take, like, a ridiculous amount of ibuprofen just to get out of bed. So, I'm feeling better this morning. Yeah. But I am... This is going to be a couple of day journey here, hopefully.
For sure.
And then I'm going to go talk to my doctor about starting physical therapy or whatever. Also, because there's clearly some muscle deficiency back there that I'm not aware of. That's just getting... It shouldn't happen. I mean, maybe it should. Maybe this is what... Well,
you said you were working in an awkward position for a prolonged period of time, so it's not as though it literally came out of nowhere, which it
Well, it didn't come out of nowhere, but I feel like this, this is not something that used to happen to me.
Well, yeah, you used to be younger. It's amazing. Every day you're older than you used to be.
I am convinced I am still younger, and you can shut your filthy Canadian mouth. Thank you very much. No one asked for your opinion on my age, and I will let you know if I ever want it, and that day will be never.
When that happens for purely no reason, that you want to go get checked out. But when there's a
perfectly valid reason for it, then there's clearly there's something amiss. It's a conspiracy. I don't know if you know what's going on in this country right now, and the greatest country, apparently, according to some, underneath the sun. Yeah. But there's a lot of conspiracies going on over here.
Everything's
one of them is my back.
Yeah,
that is probably the biggest one. I'm going to be honest with you.
Yeah,
that's the biggest one.
Feeling older every day. There's got to be someone behind that.
Got it.
External forces.
I did not sign up for that. I was forced into it against my will, and I would like to complain to the manager.
And I used to listen to songs that told me I'd be young forever. So there's no way they lied.
Let's be honest here. Who are you going to believe? A rock star?
Right.
Or a doctor?
Indeed.
let's get realistic, Rob.
Ah, dear. Well, shall we move on to what we watched? Because both of us,
Rob,
it appears, watched a couple of classic movies.
We did.
These are not brand new at all. I did not have any time to venture out to the theater, even though there are movies in the theater I would very much like to watch right now. I'll get to them someday.
My son got to see the D&D movie early because he's in college, and they had a pre-screening for college kids
at his college
who are nerds.
Cool.
And my son checks all of those boxes, like every box that could say, is this the kind of person that would give a D&D movie a good review? My son literally would have the picture at the top be like, looks like this.
Yep. He's got the sheet for his character and checks all those boxes. That's perfect.
He's got a folder that has plastic inserts for his character sheets. Thank you very much.
There you go. All right. Well, anyway, what I
he
did
loved it,
watch,
by the way. In case anybody's wondering what the college-age nerd thinks of the D&D movie, thought it was great.
Okay.
That's his review.
Well,
what did you see, Rob?
Yeah. So what I did watch just at home was The King of Comedy. Classic Robert De Niro, Martin Scorsese.
A prerequisite for seeing the Joker.
Well, yeah, and you know what? I hadn't seen The King of Comedy before. It was the glaring hole in my filmography viewing that I hadn't watched before. It's darn good. So yeah, if you haven't, or if you're like me and you haven't seen it before, that is definitely worth a watch. Absolutely, fits into modern times. It doesn't feel
a little prophetic, maybe one might say.
At the time, yes. Watching it now, and you realize it was 1983 when it came out. It was prophetic for exactly what is going on with just chasing after fame. Look, obviously it's not a social media movie because it's taking place in 1983. But in terms of just the mentality behind it and what the characters are seeking, and ultimately the outcome, which is, I'm sure, the reason it wasn't a super popular movie in theaters at the time. A lot of audiences didn't really like it or didn't feel particularly that the ending fit the way a movie ought to be. But I'm oh no, that's just exactly where society has ended up, and feels very much in place for today. So a movie that, when it came out, was ahead of its time, I'm sure, but absolutely holds up today. Yes, very obviously the influences on the most recent Joker movie are very much which they made no bones about. I mean, they cast Robert De Niro as the talk show host in Joker for this very reason. But yeah, fantastic movie, honestly. And I mean, a tight running time, it really does not overstay its welcome or drag in any way. Excellent performances throughout. And again, you have to remember, coming out in 1983, though, the way that they didn't hold your hand through some of the, is this actually happening? Is this not really happening? That was kind of new at that time. It wasn't really common, whereas we see it all the time today in TV and movies. So clearly the influence of this movie has been felt for a long time. So yes, highly recommended.
Right. My brother is autistic. I've talked about that on this podcast a number of times before. He's in his late 30s now.
Okay.
But he lives with my parents still. He's not the type of autistic that makes TikToks. He's the kind of autistic that, is above, baseline functioning, but barely. He can go out and do things, but he can't function by himself. He needs a lot of help and everything else. One of the things, in order to curb his predilections or focuses or things that he perseverates on, he gets a lot of movies. He likes movies, likes to watch movies. He likes to watch them over and over again. He's one of the only people I know who knows how to fix a VHS tape that has broken, because he has watched the same scene so many times that he's worn them out. So I've seen him
physically worn out the tape.
Yeah, I've seen him fix movies. I'm well, I can't do that. I've never even tried. I've never broken a movie either, but apparently it happened enough with him that he figured out how to do it. So he's slowly over the years upgraded to DVDs, and now he's got PlayStation 3, I think, is what he's still on. I think my parents might have a stack of PlayStation 3s that they're going to use as his burnout or whatever. So he is he's been upgrading to Blu-rays over time, and the reason that he does this is because the Blu-ray disc boxes take up less room.
That's true.
And
they're a little bit smaller.
He has a small room, small bedroom. I mean, he's got his own bathroom. It's a little ensuite. I mean, he's not exactly living under the stairs like Harry Potter, but he's got a fairly small bedroom, and it's full to the brim of movies. It's just movies and video games everywhere. So, it's all very organized in alphabetical order and everything else, but my parents want him not to take up any more space, because he will never stop buying movies if he gets the option. So what he's doing is, to make more room, he rebuys the same movie but in a smaller box. So he loves box sets.
Yeah.
And Blu-ray versions of the same movies he's already got. And he watches movies that your 5 to 12-year-old would watch. So Big Trouble in Little China is one of the more mature titles that he owns.
That's certainly not a kid's movie.
Yeah, he upgraded that recently to a Blu-ray, and I told him that I wanted I'd take the old version. I actually thought he was going to Ultra HD. I don't know why I thought that, because I'm an idiot. And I thought I was getting a Blu-ray version, but I wasn't. I was getting a DVD version. So I watched the DVD version of Big Trouble in Little China on my 90-something inch screen. Right.
In all its 480i glory.
Oh, it was, yeah. But it's still, it's surprisingly, after the first few seconds of, it's a little blurry, you stop paying attention to that.
You can watch DVDs on a big screen. It's not pristine, but it's not that bad.
It's not that bad, right? It was in 4.1 surround.
There you go.
I was like, it's the center channel of the most important speaker, people, right? Right? Are we still going with that? We still going with that one, 4.1? The most important? Are we all on board with? No? My Ultra HD Blu-ray player, the Sony X700 that I have, yeah, I was like, that's not a disc.
Oh.
Just wouldn't play it. Just didn't even know it was in there. I kept putting it in, taking it out, putting it in, taking it out. I had to play it through the Xbox.
Okay.
So, what are you going to do? But yes, great movie, of course. I haven't watched it in quite some time. In Modern Sensibilities, while we're talking about, race and everything else, it's a little problematic. But the fact that that we have the white savior character, right, who we always have to have in these movies, because if not, then why would white people watch them? At least that was the thought.
Right.
The fact that he is quite literally the stupidest person in the entire movie is just, I think it's one of the reasons why not only does the movie work, but all the scenes of just info dumping, just like, here is all the backstory that you can't possibly know because you are a stupid white person. He just comes tumbling out of their mouths, and you're like, in any other movie I'd be like, oh my god, this is bad writing, and here you're like, it kind of fits.
They built in an excuse. That's part of writing.
I'm a huge fan of this movie. It's one of those movies that I love so much that it's like your ugly child. No matter how bad it ends up looking from a distance, and when I get closer, I'm like, well, I still love you though. And that's the way I feel about Big Trouble in Little China. So yes,
all right.
Everybody should watch it. I need to get it on Blu-ray.
Watch well-known classic, highly rated movies. Turns out they're still pretty good.
They were still pretty good. All right, this is AVRant, the podcast that answers your home theater and AV questions. To get your questions answered, all you have to do is ask. You ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. Come to their website, find our episodes along with our show notes and our Flickr album, so you can follow along with the pictures of which we will be talking about and or describing. You can also find us on facebook.com/AVRant podcast, youtube.com/AVRant, where the pictures will be up on the screen. If you want to just play it in the background and every once in a while look over when we're talking about a picture, you can look over and go, oh, that's
not a ton of pictures this week, to be honest, but that's all right. Most weeks they're
really selling that YouTube channel, Rob. Rob at avrant.com is his Twitter. I mean, his email address. I'll get it. I'm getting there. He's at First Reflect on Twitter. I'm Tom at avrant.com if you want to email me directly. All right, let's talk about our listeners of the week. To become a listener of the week, support the podcast in some way. One of the ways you can do that is going to avrant.com, click on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link, and there you will be taken to a PayPal donation site. So that happened twice this week with Raf and Micah. So thank you to Raf and Micah for their PayPal donations.
Yeah, Raf and Micah, thank you very much for the PayPal donations. We appreciate your financial support.
And it's a new month, so over at patreon.com/AVRant podcast, we've got our Patreon list. These are people that every month Patreon takes some money from them and gives most of it to us. We are at 137 patrons right now, which is down 2. So if you're like, oh, I wonder why they're down 2. Have you has your credit card been? You got a new credit card in the mail recently?
That could seems to happen. Yep, that's usually the way. Yeah, that's patreon.com/AVRant podcast if you'd like to sign up or re-sign up to make an automatic monthly donation. And a big thank you to everybody who contributes to the podcast financially that way.
We also got some notes of gratitude for keeping the podcast going from David, Martin, Richard, Chris, Scott, Gav, and Dan. Dan says he wants to let Lee know that he did a fantastic job last week, but that I was missed. But that's just right, because they have poor aim. So there we go.
Well, thank you to David, Martin, Richard, Chris, Scott, Gav, and Dan for the notes of gratitude to us. Those notes of encouragement are definitely appreciated. And a big, big thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions.
So in the news this week, one of the HDMI 2.1 features that some people have been looking forward to is QMS, Quick Media Switching. The overarching promise that has some users excited is elimination of black screens in between your content when you switch from one video to another, or one format to another, or whatever. One input, I would guess, right? Input is what it's supposed to be?
Well, not really the input.
Let me read.
No.
Let me read.
Yeah,
QMS utilizes HDMI VRR, but for video sources instead of just games. So the idea is when you switch from 60 hertz menu to a 24 hertz movie source and then to a 30 hertz video, there won't be any interruption. It'll just be video on your screen the entire time. But of course, this is HDMI we're talking about, so reality isn't anywhere near what some people were envisioning. First and foremost, devices have to be either updated or come with QMS supported out of the box. At the moment, only the newest Apple TV 4K box and LG's 2023 OLEDs and a couple of QNED models actually have QMS active and functioning. But Vincent Teo from the HD TV test tried them out and discovered some disappointing results. First, and hilariously, you need to manually turn QMS off before you begin. Otherwise, when you plug in a fresh new Apple TV 4K into your new 2023 LG OLED, you'll just get endless HDMI handshaking errors until you perform firmware updates on both of them. And the only way to get the firmware update screen is either to turn QMS off or plug your Apple TV 4K into a different display that does not have QMS, because if not, they're just going to keep trying to make it work.
That's right. Wonderful. What the perfect experience any user would have with that.
Who wouldn't think that's the way it's supposed to work?
Yeah, that's right, yeah. Who wouldn't just return their Apple TV 4K, exchange it for another unit, thinking that there's something defective with theirs?
No.
Who wouldn't know to... And, turning off QMS in those 2023 LG OLEDs, I think it's about 8 button presses to dig down into the menus to find it. Just easy as pie.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I honestly think, and I don't know what's going on over it. I mean, obviously, HDMI has always been a bit of a black box full of those snakes that pop out when you open up those cans. Right. That's what HDMI kind of is. But I don't think they test anything before they release it. I think they
LG is going to have to issue a firmware update because by default QMS is on. They are going to have to issue one that by default has it off, because nobody's happy about a black endlessly cycling screen.
And all those people out there that absolutely flat out refuse to have their TV connected to the internet because they think it's watching them and tracking them, will not be able to get this update, and their TV is just going to brick all of a sudden. They're not going to know why.
Yeah, this is bad all around, because people finding that information on their own, I don't have a ton of faith in that.
Good luck to the other however many million people that do not listen, billion people that do not listen to this podcast. So anyways, once that's done, once you have all the QMS turned off, or you switch to a display that doesn't have QMS, you'll then discover that QMS is only about frame rate switching. If your signal changes resolution or HDR, you're still going to get a black screen in between. So, surprise!
Yeah. It's exactly the same as it ever was, because usually the black screens are coming up from the HDR changing.
Yeah. Why? Clearly the biggest problem was frame rate as far as HDMI, the HDMI group.
Well, there is plenty of 60 hertz menu versus 24 hertz, movie. That was definitely a reason for the black interstitial frames coming in.
Why would you want to make it work with all of the things that could cause a potential problem when you could just release it totally broken, fixing just one of them?
That's right.
Because that's what the people demand. So this is hardly the seamless video experience that some people were envisioning. At least having QMS turned on does seem to reduce the duration of the black screen when both the HDR format and the frame rate are changing. So,
it's a little bit shorter. Fixes one of the things.
And then there's the AV receiver conundrum. Even though QMS was listed as a feature in HDMI 2.1 receiver models that came out a couple of years ago, it now turns out that the manufacturer of the 2.1 boards that were used in those models, Nuvoton, who has since changed their names to Nada-Satan, has confirmed that there's no way to get it working. The HDMI 2.1 specifications for QMS were not finalized back then, so not exactly their fault. And now that it's here with the newer HDMI 2.1a specification, they don't have any way to update those older HDMI 2.1 boards to make it work.
Yeah.
Backwards compatible, people. That's what we're talking about. Denon Marant's newest receiver models even specifically list that they do not have quick media switching, so perhaps they finally learned to stop listing promised features that don't exist out of the box. Let's just say that, and I don't know who I heard say this before, but if it doesn't exist, it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Like, if they promise something...
Yep.
And then you say to yourself and everybody around you, I'm going to buy it based on this promise.
That's right.
Then
that has certainly happened many times in the past.
Then you're going to be disappointed.
I know. And I mean, amazingly, Denon Marantz on their newest models, they promised that Dirac Live would be added. They promised it would come in March, and that actually happened.
It did.
I was like, whoa, holy smokes. So, and right on their web pages, I looked up, quick media switching QMS on the new Denon Marantz models, and it says no. Right there, it says no. Even though those have the newest HDMI boards, which there's every possibility are updatable to support this thing, but they're like, nope, we're not going to say we have it until we have it. So I'm crossing my fingers. Maybe they've actually learned.
Yeah, if people would just stop buying things based on promises, they would stop lying to you.
Rebuild some trust.
It's just not. It's not. It does them no good to tell the truth. That's the real sad state. Like if they tell the truth, people are like, "Well, I'm not going to buy it because it's never going to get it." And then it's like, "Well, I mean, it's not enabled now, but it might be enabled later, but we just don't want to make any promises that we can't keep." And they're like, okay, so it's never coming. I'm going to go buy the Yamaha where they said they're definitely going to do a firmware. It's coming. Yeah. Emotiva's got a firmware update coming out any day now.
Yep. It'll come in the summer. Never said what year, but it'll come in the summer.
Found a coupon the other day for a discount for pizza, and the date for the coupon, signed by a manager, and it was written on there, good until 10/31.
Great.
Did not say a year.
Yeah.
So basically, any day of the year except for 10th, and even, I guess, including 10/31.
November and December.
No, I just don't, I think that you're good. Because this person could have given it to you in November, and then it would be good until the next end of October.
You could make that argument.
So I think it's just good. It's just good forever.
Mm-hmm.
Promises, people. Promises. All right. Japan OLED or JOLED, whatever. JOLED.
JOLED. Yeah.
JOLED.
It's Japan OLED.
JOLED. I think it's JOLED. Has filed for bankruptcy protection and announced that it's closing its 2 factories, laying off nearly 300 employees. JOLED was the panel supplier for professional OLED monitors from IZO, Asus, IZO, EIZO, IZO, Asus, and LG. They were also TCL's partner for inkjet printed OLED panels. Their focus was always mid-side screens, leaving small OLED screens for phones, primarily the Samsung display, and large TV-size screens, primarily to LG display. Any professional OLED monitors that use JOLED screens are expected to be discontinued. So,
pretty sure we have to pronounce it GOLED because, GIF and GIF. This is spelled with a J, but got to pronounce it with a hard G sound, I think.
I mean,
That's probably the way it's going to
be. I mean, it looks like Joel with a D at the end, so like...
I mean, it's just
Joel
J-OLED.
in the past tense.
All this is J-OLED for Japan OLED. That's all that's going on here. But anyway...
There's going to be a lot of people in, like, the next time we talk about this, and I refuse to say there's anything other than Joel,
yes,
are going to be very confused by our news.
I would be, yes. Although we might not be talking about it that much because it seems
they're
like
out of business.
But yeah, it was
they're
primarily
get bought
Panasonic.
By, Sound United. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, JOLED was largely when it was founded a joint venture between Panasonic and Sony. So, yeah, the big thing that they were working on right from the beginning was that inkjet printed OLED. That was the whole thing that they were really aiming towards. It seemed like they were finally making some headway. There were some prototypes that TCL had shown at this most recent CES and really started to look quite promising. But I guess this is clearly going to be a setback now that the primary company behind that, apparently a lot of their research is being taken on by another company. But in terms of just physical manufacturing, shutting down those two, manufacturing facilities obviously means that there's going to be a setback. So I don't know. Inkjet printed OLED still might never really be a thing that comes to consumers.
Yes. So I wrote an article in 2021 called TCL. What's it called? TCL OLED TVs by 2023.
Right. Yeah.
And this, I remember this because of this. I'm pretty sure. I'm looking for the JOLED thing in here, but I don't think it's in here. But it is all talking about them bringing these TVs out, and this is clearly how they were meaning to do it. Oh, there it is, JOLED. Invested in a company called JOLED Inc. This investment is leading to a large OLED panels that are inkjet printed.
That was the thing.
That was them.
That's too bad.
Not going to be.
I had hopes for that inkjet printed thing because it should have made them cheaper and easier to make. That was the whole idea.
Somebody should buy the technology and then do something with it. Okay. Onkyo, Integra, and Pioneer Elite all have new 11-channel flagship receiver models, all based on the same underlying platform, but with some unique features to each of the respective brands. All right, you ready? Here we go. Okay, so think of it like this is all the same car model and
sister models,
and then they're going to be like the Honda, the Integra, and the whatever comes after that. I don't know what comes after that. Acura. That's it. The Onkyo TX-RZ70 is sort of the baseline. It has 11 amplifiers built in and processing for 11.2 with independent dual subwoofer outputs. The amplifiers are Class A, B, and rated at 140 watts per channel to 8 ohms, 2 channels driven. 6 HDMI inputs in the back are 2.1 with 40 gigabits per second bandwidth, which is about as high as anything gets these days. I don't know that there's anything
as far as sources.
Higher.
Yep.
Yeah. A pair of HDMI outputs are also 2.1. Then there's a 7th HDMI input on the front, but that's only 18 gigabits per second, so for your phone or whatever. And there's a Zone 2 HDMI output, which is also 18 gigabits per second. There's no more mention of ACU EQ at all. It's all DRAC now, which is shocking to no one.
Indeed.
And DRAC Live Full is included out of the box. You can optionally pay to add DRAC Live Base Management, but with only 2 subwoofer outputs, it's a bit questionable how useful it really is in this case. They're also promising to add Oro 3D decoding in June via firmware update, which is also supposed to add Rune support at that time. Let me tell you.
Hold your breath, folks. Hold your breath.
Why? Let's support this legacy format that only the internet cares about. And you know what people on the internet do? They say you should buy a thing based on the fact that they are promising a thing.
That's right.
It's priced at $2,700. So compared to the 1600 TX-RZ70, it's adding an extra 2 channels of amplification built in. The 50 has 9 amps built in, but can process 11.2 channels and Oro 3D support. So, worth it.
Yeah, to me that's a tough sell. I'd much rather take the difference in price.
Was that $1,100 for $1,100? I can get a 2-channel amp.
Yeah, you can definitely
slightly less than that.
At least a 2-channel amp for that. But there you go. That would be my choice.
So, Pioneer Elite sister model is the VSX-LX805. Most of the features are all the same, but it bumps up the wattage specs to 150 watts per channel to 8 ohms, 2 channels driven through the magic of changing one little thing a little bit just so they can make that number different. Or actually just like bumping the Onkyo number down by 10 and saying, let's just spec it down a little lower. This one's more accurate.
Change the harmonic distortion figure a little bit, and there we go. We wiggle those 10 watts.
Some XLR inputs and outputs for the front, left, and right channels only. Also has 4 RCA pre-outs for the subwoofers, but it's still only 2 independent subwoofer channels for the purposes of calibration. You just have 2 internal Y splitters. So,
that's right.
Zing, gotcha. Anyways, there's no more mention of MCACC room correction because it was crap.
I mean, AccuEQ was worse.
I was going to say. So again, it's DRX only, and for those XLR inputs and tiny wattage spec bump, the price goes up a bit to $3,000. Very interestingly, this is also a Class AB amplifier design, which is disappointing. No Class D here like we're used to from Pioneer. Class D, you could have gotten a lot more power for a lot less power coming from the wall. In theory, and it could have been smaller and lighter and a bunch of other, not as hot and a bunch of other things, but instead we're just going to cook the whole thing. All right. So that seems like a deal. Finally, there's an Integra DRX-8.4 version, same specs as the Pioneer Elite, but it adds a pair of XLR outputs for the subwoofers and more 12-volt trigger ports. So custom installer friendly.
That's
it also has the option to reassign the height to binding posts to power a pair of passive subwoofers if you want to. Who?
I don't know. I mean, I guess this is the in-wall subwoofer thing, because I mean, there's plenty of passive in-wall subwoofers, and this is definitely targeted at custom integrators. So, I guess somebody out there asked for this.
I don't know.
Seems
for
a little
those extra
strange
features,
to me, but,
I know the price goes up to $3,200.
That's right.
Not super duper competitive. Okay. I want to say something about DRX here because I've been thinking about it a lot lately. I am happy DRX's around.
Yes,
I think that Odyssey has had no serious competition for a very long. Like their most serious competition has been like Trinoff, which doesn't really count because
completely different price class.
Yeah, not even close. And Yamaha, which was feature locked in or manufacturer locked into their own products.
Yeah.
And
then
really,
similarly, like Anthem Room Correction, which wasn't miles away in terms of price point, but it was that brand only. So if you weren't an Anthem user, then you weren't getting that anywhere else.
I want to see Odyssey evolve a little bit. I mean, I think that the Multi QX was.
I mean, personally, I think that's as far as they're ever going to go. I think they're done in terms of development.
Maybe, but I think that they can. I think they can do more. I don't know what it is.
I just want DRX to add curves of equal loudness, and then I'm happy to use that. That's
well, you
really
see,
all
you're
I
more
want.
of a. I think DRX has got a lot of room to grow. I think they can make their user interface a lot better. They can make it so that you don't need to use your own microphone and you don't have to use your own computer.
Well, I mean, they've kind of done that with this Onkyo and Pioneer and Integra. They do include a microphone that you can use with DRX as long as you're using the smartphone app version of DRX. It won't work with your PC. For that, you would have to have a separate USB microphone that you plug directly into PC, but there is an app, smartphone app version of DRX that these brands are using, and then they have an included microphone for that.
Yeah. So we'll see what happens in the future.
Yeah.
I hate the name room correction anyways.
Sure.
I'm sick of that. I'm sick of room correction as people like
automated equalization. That would be the better term.
The problem is we already had equalization. I just wrote this article this weekend actually, where why can't your room correction fix? Why do you have to have room treatments and have room correction? They're just doing the same thing, and it's just because the name is so bad. The name is so bad.
Yeah.
So yes, I would love to see, but there's never. I just don't see that there's ever going to be an electronic version of putting panels on your walls. As much as they want to try to,
that's what DRX is aiming for.
but it's never going to work the way that putting a panel on your wall is going to work. It just, I just can't imagine it will, unless we really start putting speakers literally everywhere in our home theaters. And as much as speaker manufacturers would love that,
that's right,
and amplifier manufacturers would love that, I think the rest of us are being realistic and know that we really can't hardly put the Atmos crap in as it is. Adding more speakers on top of that.
For me, for the price points, looking at these new Onkyo and Pioneer and Integra models, like I was a little disappointed that these don't process 13 channels or 15 channels, because I'm like, okay, you've gone to a significantly higher price point than the RZ50 and its sister models. You are adding 2 more channels of amplification built in, so you can power the entire 11 channel setup just with the AV receiver, not necessarily having to add an external amplifier just to have enough channels of amplification. But they're not going beyond that at all. So for the price point that they're doing with these, I was a touch disappointed that these weren't, 11 amps built in, but processing 13 channels or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's too bad. Comments from our listener, Scott. We discussed Scott's upcoming theater build in which he described having a recessed section in his front wall that's just a tiny bit smaller than the screen size he's going to install. That recessed section is about a foot deep. All of his speakers are in-wall models, so we suggested simply putting in some stick framing so the center speaker could be basically flush, and then there'd be space behind the center speaker they could fill in with insulation. Scott just wanted to mention they already decided to go with a Stewart Filmscreen, and that's micro-perforated model. They strongly recommend that any speaker positioned behind the Micro-Perf screen have 1 foot of distance. So that's why he was still going to put his center in the wall, while his left and right speakers would go to either side of the screen sitting flush. The woven screens don't have this distance requirement. So I guess they don't want it to bow out or whatever.
I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't imagine it would actually force it on. I think it's more just to do with, high frequency dispersion. Having it that close to much of the screen is still solid in the case of the micro-perforateds. So I think they're just hoping that by having a little bit of distance for a small amount of dispersion to take place behind the surface of the screen, that it's going to impact the high frequencies a little bit less. So there you go. I mean, one other option would be to get a woven screen. Stewart has a woven screen option, so that if you just want to stick with Stewart.
What we said before about it was that we thought that putting it forward would allow you to just shove insulation behind it really easily.
That's right, yeah.
Right? So you can still put it where you want it. Like, first of all, I think that this is a very silly requirement, and I'm not going to design my home theater around the fact that your screen is stupid. And I mean, it's fine if that's... I've never thought to myself, it would make a acoustically transparent screen better, requiring there to be space behind it. Like that... Yeah. This isn't pointless.
New. This is the older technology. The woven screens are the newer technology that basically fixed that requirement.
So if it were me, I would either change screens, or if you want to stick with the screen for whatever reason, and I'm fine with you doing it, you just have to be a little bit more thoughtful about the insulation that you put back there, and making sure that you're 15 degrees off center,
at least,
is clear at least. So you don't want it
firing into some insulation that is in front of the speaker drivers.
Yeah. So you want from the center of the speaker, 15 degrees to either side, so a full 30 degrees cone in front of it.
Yeah.
You want that to be completely clear of insulation. Everything else you can fill with insulation. So that's it's certainly doable for you. It's not a big deal.
It's an insulation horn. We're going to shape
It's exactly what it is. It's going to be a horn-loaded speaker, but you're horn-loading the entire speaker, which is fun.
And not actually having the effects of a horn at all, because it's
not hard.
Absorptive material, not reflective.
All right, some questions here. You guys have questions left over from last week? Jeez, what were you guys doing?
I don't know.
Eric uses a BenQ TX-850 projector. He spotted a dead pixel, so he sent it back in for repair. It seems as though he will probably just be sent a whole new replacement unit. So he isn't sure, but he's going to inquire if it might be possible for him to pay extra to get an upgraded BenQ model rather than a direct replacement to the TK850. His room is very dark at night when he's watching movies, so any sort of upgrade in terms of movie performance would be nice. He also plays some games, so any upgrade over the TK850's somewhat slow 83 millisecond latency would also be nice. Which BenQ model should he ask about? I tell you what, if you call them and ask this question, and they say no, say, okay, thank you very much. I was just wondering. Hang up, call again, and see if you get a different person. Because I think it's going to be highly dependent on who. Like, wait an hour and see if maybe there's lunches going on someplace. Call again. Because I think that the answer to this question is always yes. Eventually, you just have to get the right person on the other end of the phone. So I feel like this is a doable thing. So yes, what do you think, Rob?
Yeah, because it is pretty common, like especially with a DLP projector. Like a DLP projector, they are not going to fix a single pixel. There's no way to do that.
No.
At most, if they actually returned the same chassis to you, they would have to replace the entire optical block, because with a DLP projector, you also can't separate the tiny little digital micro mirror device from the rest of the optical block. So I mean, if there's any repair going on, it's entirely switching out the entire entire optical block of that projector, it is far more likely, especially with a projector that costs under $1,200 retail, that they're just going to send you a refurbished unit in its place. So yeah, the possibility of saying, you know what, I'll pay the difference, and he didn't want to pay a tremendous amount more, so I'm not going to focus on, you know, the $6,000 models that BenQ has available, going to be ones much closer in price to this, you know, that they might be able to send you a refurbished one of those in place and you pay the difference. Yeah, like Tom says, if they say no at first, try again, because you never know. It might be entirely possible. But to answer the question that he was asking about, I think he might have spotted some of their newest gaming specific models. They've got a couple of models in the lineup now that they are targeting at gamers, specifically the X3000i. Which is LED-based light source. It's not lamps or lasers. It's an LED-based light source. And this is one of the units where it is using the native 1080p resolution panel, but they can wobble it 4 times per frame to give you true 4K resolution. But the other thing they can do is just run that 1080p panel at 1080p, but 240 hertz. Instead of 60 hertz, because they can use the same panel 4 times per frame, so they can run it at 1080p 240 or 1080p 120 coming out of your game system, and it's one of the projectors that can do that. So you might have been looking at that. I would only warn that by all the reviews, I haven't looked at this thing in myself in person, but like Projector Central, whom I trust when it comes to projector reviews, they're like, yeah, honestly, the black levels just aren't that great. The contrast coming out of this projector just, you know, isn't fantastic. And they tout that it can do full 100% of DCI P3 color, but they say when it does that, it cuts the light output fully in half. It's a full half cutting of the brightness coming out of the projector when it goes into the wide color mode. So all in all, I would point you much more to the HT3550. That's a fairly old model at this point, but they haven't released an upgrade to that just yet in their lineup. The HT3550 lamp-based projector, just like the TK850 is. Honestly, the TK850 is a bit of a stripped-down HT3550. The HT3550 shines a bit better for movies, though, because it does have support for the wider color. It has a different color wheel in it, in front of its lamp, than the TK850. The TK850 is using the more common business type color wheel in it that just has red, green, blue, and I think they've got like a yellow and clear in there as well, whereas the HT3550 uses a red, green, blue, 6-segment color wheel and gives you purer colors and wider color support. I think it's like 95% of that DCI P3 color gamut is possible. It is a little bit dimmer than your TK850 as a result, because it doesn't have like that clear part of the color filter. But if what you want is a little bit better black levels, a little bit better contrast, wider color support, but just a little bit dimmer, which shouldn't be a problem in a fully blacked out room, sure, then the HT3550 is the one I would point you to. It's where I point a lot of people who are looking in that sort of $1,500 price class for a 4K projector. It's honestly a very nice unit. It has a tiny little bit of vertical lens shift, which is super nice to have for just that last little bit of adjusting the image on your screen. So I love that it includes that. And as far as the latency goes, its 1080p latency is about the same as the TK850. It's still about 80 milliseconds if you're putting in a 1080p signal, but if you are putting in 4K, the TK850 was about 83 milliseconds regardless. On the HT3550, if you feed it a 4K resolution signal, it drops down to like 24 milliseconds, which is very, very usable for any game. So hopefully the game systems you have are outputting 4K resolution, and then you get the lower latency on that as well. So all around, HT3550 is definitely where I'd point you.
Okay. Bob asks, what does the term soundstage actually mean? He's heard the phrase collapsed soundstage to describe a problem, but isn't sure if he's ever actually heard that before or not. He's got a 5.1 speaker system using NHT speakers with a SVS SB2000 sub. Assuming the speakers are all capable enough, what factors are at play and that would alter his soundstage? Is soundstage just referring to being able to pinpoint exactly where an instrument seems to be on stage? How do you go about determining whether you have a good soundstage or not? Are there certain test tracks or pieces of music you're supposed to play? So Bob, almost all of these audiophile-esque, and they're not all audiophile terms, but these audio terms are ill-defined at best.
Yeah, this one, like Soundstage,
particular.
I have a bit of a jokey answer because my jokey answer is Soundstage is the catch-all term that people use to describe sounds that they notice during a sighted listening test, but objectively and in a blind listening test, they can never identify reliably, and they just chalk it up to the Soundstage improved. That's my jokey answer to it, but I mean, it is a common audio jargon term, which does have a definition, but like Tom says, it is a bit vague overall.
So when I use Soundstage, I'm usually talking about width or height of a soundstage.
Or
it's
depth.
mostly width, or depth too, but mostly width.
Width is most common for sure.
So what you're looking for here is the ability, and usually it's of two speakers. Like I find it humorous when people talk about like, oh, my 7.1 or 5.1 or Atmos system has great soundstage. I'm like, how could it not? There's speakers everywhere. Like, right. what is it trying to it's not trying to recreate sounds in weird places. There are speakers in all of those places. It just plays the noise. That's not a soundstage. That's just a speaker doing its thing. So and in 2-channel in particular, which is when I'm doing tests for speakers, I'm listening to how well the sounds are placed within the space. So normally that's side to side, sometimes it's front to back, sometimes it's up to down, but normally it's side to side. So
now I do want to clarify when we're talking about like pinpointing exactly where a sound is coming from or identifying where a sound is on like a virtual stage. That is actually imaging.
Yes.
The word to use for that is imaging. Now, imaging and soundstage very much go hand in hand. But soundstage, for me to put a little bit of a more precise definition on it, it is essentially the size in terms of width, height, and depth of that virtual sound stage in front of you. It is very much what the name describes. It is the idea that you have, and again, it's predominantly when we're listening to stereo that we end up talking about soundstage. You have these two speakers that are physically positioned wherever they are in front of you in your room, but then you listen to the sound that they're producing, and does it seem as though the stage that's in front of you, if there were one, is actually wider or narrower than where the speakers are? Like, is there a physical boundary based on where those speakers are physically placed in your room? Do sounds ever seem to come from farther to the left than where your front left speaker physically is?
Right.
Or do all the sounds always seem to be like not just at the borders where the speakers physically are, but actually everything sounds narrower, or everything sounds shorter, or everything sounds like it's on a two-dimensional plane depth-wise, or you do get this sense of layering from front to back in addition to width and height. So the precise placement of sounds, being able to point and say a sound came from exactly there, that's imaging. Right. But the just overall sense of space of where could sounds come from, that would be the sound stage. So if we're talking about a collapsed sound stage, that's where I know some of these sounds should be coming from the center or the right in front of me, but it sounds as though everything is coming from my left. Yeah, that would be a collapsed soundstage. Or, I can reach out my arms and that's about a 30-degree angle to my left and about a 30-degree angle to my right. But it never seems as though any sounds are coming from wider than 15 degrees apart in front of me. That's a collapsed and narrow soundstage.
Or even if your speakers are meant to be towed in quite a bit and you have them straight out, then sounds will pass through one speaker and then there'll be a gap, and then they'll jump into the center speaker, and then there'll be a gap and they'll jump into the left speaker, and that is a different kind of collapse in a way. It's kind of a distorted soundstage. So if you're asking yourself, do I have a good soundstage? Then you don't have to worry about it. You would, most like, especially with a 5.1 system, which is what he's got, you're not really worried about soundstage all that much because there are physically speakers everywhere. Yeah. That said, get some 2-channel music, right? Especially something with some movement in the music, and there's like that Dr. Chesky's.
Yeah, Dr. Chesky's is a darn good one to use because there's lots of moving around and forward to back and up and down.
Yeah, they have literal tests of like they put like the binaural head
That's right.
thing, and
Which,
then
again,
it walks around in the circle. You're not
you're
meant to be able to do that with stereo speakers.
Sure, but it
all
still
that
has
well.
a good effect on that. And again, the precise location, that would be the imaging. But just in
Right.
terms of, does it seem as though some of these sounds extend beyond the physical locations of the speakers? That gives you a sense of soundstage. And exactly what Tom talked about, are these panning sounds very contiguous? Do they sound, very smooth as they move, or do they seemingly teleport
Jump
at some
around,
point?
yeah.
Yeah,
So,
that's a good test.
With these tests that for binaural, where you really wouldn't expect stereo speakers to do a fantastic job unless you have them precisely placed, and you are exactly where you need to be as far as your ears are concerned, and these two speakers, and you do not move at all. I would expect it to move, from, I think it usually goes counterclockwise, I feel like, if I remember correctly. So I would expect it to go counterclockwise into the left speaker and maybe a little bit to your sides, and then seemingly go back the other direction directly in front of you.
Sure.
And then kind of like a pendulum. It will pendulum back and forth until it gets back to the center. That's what I would expect to hear in there. And that would be considered to me, decent imaging, and as long as nothing collapses, a good soundstage.
Yeah, Dr. Chesky's records are available on Spotify and Apple Music, so you don't have to make a purchase. You can stream them, in fact, from Spotify. So.
Spotify don't have the tests, though. They just have the music, at least here in the States. So the music can be a little bit different, but it does have a lot of, there's music there. It does have a lot of movement in it, in the music.
Right,
You just have to find the right ones.
Yeah, so again, we end up with this sort of combination of soundstage and imaging. It's pretty hard to separate those two things entirely and be like, this test is strictly for soundstage with no imaging tests. You're not really going to get that. But I just mention that because in terms of the terminology, they're so often conflated that, I just wanted to make that part clear. The other one I wanted to mention is delineation. Because that doesn't really have anything to do with positioning. That has to do with, for example, you go out and listen to live music. Usually, you can sort of focus in on one particular instrument or voice, right? You can focus basically your mind and your listening and go, I just want to really pay attention to the trumpet in this orchestra. And you can sort of do that and tune out a lot of the other sounds and focus in. If you're able to do that with a recording, that's an indication of delineation in the sounds, which is very often misidentified as channel separation. I see that all the time, people going, oh, the channel separation improved. I'm like, no, channel separation is where what was supposed to be played out of the left speaker leaks into the right speaker. That would be bad channel separation, and good channel separation is sounds that were only supposed to come from the left, only come from the left, and don't leak into the right. That's channel separation. But being able to focus in and pick out one instrument or one voice from an orchestra or a chorus or something, that's delineation of the sound. So those are just a couple of other terms to throw in there since you were asking about soundstage.
Right. Brian. Back in January, Brian wrote us about his long HDMI cable run, about 100 feet, that had started having handshaking issues whenever he changed apps or sources. It was an 18 gigabit per second fiber optic HDMI cable from Monoprice, which I worked fine at first, but started having this problem after several months of use. His primary source is his Xbox Series X, and the signal was going through his AV receiver. We had him test what would happen if he plugged his Xbox and AV receiver directly into his TV using regular, shorter length HDMI cables. That all worked perfectly fine, so the issue seemed to be with that 100-foot fiber optic cable. Mm-hmm. But before I read the rest of this question, which I have not read until this very moment, I just want to say, troubleshooting HDMI issues is exceedingly difficult and often counterintuitive. I cannot express to you how easy it was to take a component cable, which was three individual coaxial cables.
That's right.
And troubleshoot. Like if you plugged it in and it didn't work, and you plugged a different one in and it did work, you knew it was the first cable that was the problem. But too often with HDMI, you do that, it tells you nothing. It still could be anything, and you're not really sure why. So let's go on. Monoprice provided good customer service and took that cable back and gave him store credit, but their ultra high speed fiber optic HDMI cables were out of stock at that time, so he got the AVLink fiber optic cable that we recommended to him at the time. He has a PVC pipe acting as a cable conduit inside his walls. It has a couple of bends in it. He wound up pulling really hard to get the new cable through one section and was worried that he might have damaged something. HDMI cables being fragile? What? What?
I mean, at least it's fiber optic. It doesn't have the stupid little 19 tiny connections inside of it.
At first, he thought everything was fine when the Xbox menu and Netflix menu showed up perfectly. Then he got scared when the autoplay preview videos on Netflix looked all jumbled, and pressing play on Netflix movie resulted in a jumbled video. Amazon Prime and physical Blu-ray disc also showed this problem. The menus looked fine, but once video playback started, the image was all jumbled. However, he simply did a full reboot of his Xbox, and now the video has been perfect ever since.
Yup.
I swear to God. There should come like a little sacrificial altar with your HDMI cables so that you can sacrifice, like, I've got this chicken cutlet. I'm going to sacrifice it to the HDMI gods and hope it fixes my problem. And then a card on there that has a number of a young priest and an old priest to come over there
you need that, all right.
and just throw some holy water on everything. So he mainly just wanted to thank us for tackling his original question for the AVLink and for the AVLink cable recommendation. But do we have any idea what could have been going on with the video playback at first? He's just curious. Never, ever touch anything again. That's my recommendation for you. I have no clue. Why would that have fixed it? It shouldn't have.
Yeah.
It absolutely should not have fixed it.
I have one theory. Because he did go from a premium HDMI cable, 18 gigabits per second, premium high speed that is, to ultra high speed, 48 or 40 gigabits per second cable. Now there is an outright connector difference between premium high speed and ultra high speed. In premium high speed cables, 3 out of the 19 pairs of tiny little wires inside, if we're talking about the regular copper version, or 3 out of the 19 connectors that you have on an HDMI plug, 3 out of the 19 are used to actually carry the video signal. So they do so at 6 gigabits per second per each of those 3, and that's how you end up with the 18 gigabits per second of premium high speed. In the case of ultra high speed, they actually use 4 of those connectors out of the 19, and each of them can send 10 or 12, which is how you end up at the 40 or the 48 gigabits per second total bandwidth that ultra high speed can send. Now, physically inside of a copper cable, there's no difference going on. It's just that, what signal actually gets assigned to the pins on the ports is different, whether you're using premium high speed or ultra high speed. It's either 3 are sending video signals or 4 are sending video signals, but there's no difference in the connections. On the fiber optic, there's some translation that's going on there. There's a little chip inside that's changing the electrical signal that is on the plugs themselves into, a light signal that gets sent down the cable. So I'm just thinking, okay, it had whatever handshake was established from the old connection. You swapped in this new ultra high speed fiber optic HDMI cable. Maybe it, for whatever reason, still thought it had to send the video through only 3 of those connections instead of 4. And then once you did the full reboot, it's like, okay, I've got an ultra high speed connection. I'm now all going to use all 4 lanes of this video connection. So, I mean, I have no idea if that's the real thing, but that's the only speculation I could come up with for why something like this might be the case on a technical level. Like, that is a change that exists between premium high speed and ultra high speed. So maybe it's something like that.
I think when you pulled really hard, it stretched everything out a little bit. And when you rebooted, it sent a signal back and it just popped back in place.
Right, yeah.
That's what I think happened.
I honestly don't know, but that was my technical guess. It's not the last we'll hear of HDMI this podcast, by the way.
I am shocked. This is my shocked look. This is what I look like when I am shocked that a thing is happening. Advil is kicking in. I'm feeling a little bit better. Jack is following a forum thread over at Audio Science Review in which the participants are attempting to perform blind listening comparisons between different bookshelf and desktop monitor speakers. For their second trial, they built a motorized spinning table that allows them to move any of 5 speakers into listening positions within 1.75 seconds. And they use padded stands and straps to hold all the speakers in place with their tweeters all exactly at the same height. They took in-room measurements to compare the frequent responses against ASR's Klippel measurements and predicted in-room response calculations, and they made note of the predicted preference scores that are calculated using the Klippel measurements and Harman's speaker target research, whatever. sounds very technical. They had groups of listeners score the different speakers using 5 different test tracks of music and wanted to see how closely their blind listening preferences scores lined up with the calculated and predicted preference scores. In short, they could only acknowledge that their sample size was too small and they couldn't collect enough data to draw any statistically significant conclusions. But that wasn't entirely a point. This was a learning experience, and the main takeaway was that performing well-controlled, scientific, rigorous experiments is really hard. Says literally everybody who's ever tried to do it.
Indeed. Yeah,
including me.
But the thing is, I do not want to discourage this one little bit. This is excellent. I am really glad that people are taking this on and being like, oh yeah, like this is why scientific studies take years for something that seems simple and sometimes even obvious, but in order to actually collect scientifically, statistically significant data, it takes a long time. You have to run the tests over and over and over again, get repeatable results, improve the testing experiment over and over until you're able to drill down to the actual results and something you can say with a fair degree of certainty, this is statistically significant now. So it's not easy.
As far as like getting a number of the right number of people or whatever, if you can guarantee randomization in your population, meaning that you literally have the power to go out there and pull numbers out of a hat and get people and make them do the test, and it will be random. Like there's no bias in there at all. You don't need nearly as many participants as you think you do.
Right.
Like you don't need thousands of people. You need like 110 or something like that. It's like a staggeringly low number of people for true statistical significance. The problem is that's randomizing only one factor within a number of factors. Sure. And what you do not realize, one of the things that we do when we run these statistical analyses is we do analyses that point out that there might be a bias in there that you didn't anticipate or you don't know about. Yep. So you do the test, you run these things and like a factor analysis or, and see what kind of hangs together. And you're like, why are these things hanging together? Why are these people, these scores, why are they all the same? And then you have to go back and look and say, well, is this a bias or is this some sort of outside influence or is this an effect of the test that we're doing?
The thing actually under test.
Yes. It's very hard.
Yeah.
It's very, very hard. And like Rob said, certainly don't want to discourage anybody from doing this sort of thing, but I want to point out more than anything, and I cannot stress this enough, no one cares. Okay, it's no one cares because the effects that these things I'm going to get to. I'm going to read the rest of it.
People care.
They care. The effects that these tests are meant to tease out are extremely small. Okay, that's what they are meant to tease out.
That is a large part of what they want to test.
They're like, true.
We've got these Harman predictions. Audio Science Review, they utilize that. They post that. They rank things based upon, what is calculated. And they're like, but is that real? Like, we want to test. Is that real? Does the difference in the numerical score of what Harman predicts you will prefer in a speaker design, does that line up with reality? Like, I really am quite pleased with this group in this particular forum thread because they're fully admitted. They're like, yeah, this isn't a conclusion. Like, don't take this one experiment we did and run with it and post everywhere that this is the way speakers really are. They're like, nah. They're like, we had a ton of problems with this, but we're going to describe our process. We're going to describe the shortcoming. Like, that's really important. I'm really proud of them doing things this way.
But my point is that what people really want to know are the big differences. And you don't have to do all this for big. Like, there is no doubt that you take like an Infinity subwoofer, like an old Infinity 12 or 10-inch subwoofer, and you stack it against literally any SVS subwoofer.
Sure.
And you're not going to go, I don't know. They kind of sound the same to me. They don't. They don't sound the same to you. One sounds significantly worse than the other, and you do not need a test to prove it. Okay, and that's the real information that most buyers want. I love this stuff. I cannot stress that enough either. This is right up my alley. This is what I like. This is what I like to read about. I would spend this could be 30 pages long.
That's right.
I'm not talking about like pages on the internet. I'm talking like single spaced 10-point font, 30 pages, and I'd be sitting there going,
Tom's college education included statistics. He is into this stuff.
Just a little bit. So anyways, so this is my jam, but for most people, it's like, you're arguing minutia, and no one really cares. So anecdotally, sorry. They observed a couple of interesting things. They discovered afterwards that, despite having attempted to perfectly level match all of the speakers tested, one of the speakers had enough frequency response variation in room that setting its level via pink noise resulted in it being about 3 dB quieter when playing the actual music tracks that were being used during the test. They wound up throwing out all of that data, but this quieter speaker was universally giving much lower scores. 3 dB, by the way, is the threshold by which most people can tell that something is quieter than something else.
Reliably notice that one is quieter than the other. Yeah, there's the whole technical thing of 1 dB is about what we can detect in terms of level difference, but in terms of like really reliably being, that is clearly quieter than the other thing. 3 dB is right about there.
3 dB is right there, so that's good. And this is very interesting too, because what this says is, pink noise, if we take the entire frequency range and we put it all out in one little noise, we're all level matched. But the fact that this speaker has variations that are happening because of the room, because of it, because of its own design, its crossover, its drivers, or whatever, the music that it's being played, which is not the entire frequency range at any given point, is actually quieter. So you would actually want to bump the speaker up by about 3 dB, but...
And it's also an indication that there's like one particular frequency in this room that was probably resonating a little bit out of this particular speaker, like whether that's just the exact port tuning it had lined up with the resonance of the room.
Maybe there was another speaker behind it that because they're all on this turntable thing, right?
That's right.
So that's interesting. B, whatever. For speakers that were actually level matched, it wasn't difficult to tell the speakers apart It wasn't difficult to tell the speakers apart in out and out terms, but scoring which speaker the listeners preferred in any given comparison, the ratings came out closer together than what the calculated preference ratings had predicted. Basically, unless the music track specifically revealed a measured flaw in one speaker but not the other, it was extremely challenging to hear the differences. Jack just found it all very interesting and wanted to get our thoughts, but does it maybe indicate that a lot of us worry too much and we could actually just buy a cheap set of speakers and still be happy? Stop throwing truth bombs at us, Jack. Let me be honest with you. I've been writing this over. I've really gotten on this kick that the threshold for good speakers is far, far lower than any of us really realize. The ability to get we're like, oh no, that doesn't do the entire frequency range. Nothing. You can't hear the entire frequency range. Your ears don't get it either, And not only that, the threshold for what most people would consider to be a good speaker is so low that, what you like to say around here, $500 for a bookshelf, right? $1,000 to $1,500 for a floor standing speaker, kind of where the point of diminishing returns comes. I think it's
probably lower than
way lower than that.
That's right.
I don't even think floor standers should be in the equation because I don't think anybody cares about that. Even if they don't have a subwoofer, I don't think they care. Yes, this is exactly true. When you start controlling these variables for these speakers, and God help them if they, this is just one room. I mean,
and they were doing, like what Harman has done for a lot of their tests. This was mono. Like they didn't have two of these platters spinning around and putting a stereo pair of these speakers in position. This was one speaker at a time being listened to in mono. And I mean, I've mentioned this before. I've mentioned this before. I mentioned it last week when Lee was here. Like my favorite part of that Harman research, a lot of which was done in mono, is the reverse part of it. Everyone's focusing, all the audiophile people, they always focus on this is what you need to do to be able to reliably hear the differences. The flip side of that to me has always been, wait a second. As soon as you get to stereo, let alone especially once you get to surround sound, it turns out people have a heck of a time telling even speakers apart. Like speakers that, yes, in mono, in test conditions, they can very reliably, well beyond a statistical coin flip, tell the two speakers apart. Not like amplifiers or cables where nobody can tell them apart when they're blind. But in speakers, legitimately, people can tell them apart. And yet, the Harman research has shown you get to even just stereo and people start having a tough time telling speakers apart. And I mean, I think, anecdotally in their own tests, they're like, yeah, that's kind of the case. Like even in mono, unless the test track specifically played in the frequency range where there was a clear difference between the two speakers, over the rest of the frequency range, the majority of the song, they were like, it's kind of tough to even tell the speakers apart.
So I'm going to tell you guys a little bit of a secret here, okay? A little bit of a secret here. When I did the review of the Monoprice Audition B5 bookshelf speakers, right, I was swapping speaker wires back and forth, right? Turning the receiver off so I didn't short anything out, and then swapping the speaker cables. I had a friend over at the time, okay, and they were I was like, hey, you want to do this speaker test with me? And they're into audio enough that they were excited about the potential of sitting in my room while I sat in the best seat, and they didn't, so that I could I eventually left the room and let them audition the speakers by themselves, so they can compare to their own. They have the Pioneer Jones, they have the ELAC ones. Okay. So, and I have SVS Ultra speakers, right? So we were in here and we were kind of swapping them back and forth and talking and stuff like that. And I at one point went, wow, this is, I'm kind of surprised because when I first started this, it seemed like these two speakers are a little bit further apart. But now that I'm listening to this sweep, because we were listening to some sweeps at the time, the sweep, they don't sound that, they don't sound that much further apart, but they sound a little weird, right? Turns out I had left one Ultra speaker connected and one of the Audition speakers connected. So when I swapped that out and went back to both the Audition speakers, like the top end of the range dropped down by like 3 hertz, 3 kilohertz, 3 kilohertz, right? So it went from like 15 whatever down to 12 kilohertz, whatever was where the sweep started to kick in. But the fact that I could put those two speakers next to me in the same stereo pair and go and just go, oh, it sounds a little weird, but it's a little bit. I mean, it wasn't like, oh my god, it's it's an
night versus day, Tom. Night versus day.
We are talking about an order of magnitude difference in price,
right?
And overall quality, just like everything.
And if you had just been listening to a TV show, not a
chance.
Like
not a chance.
Yeah, exactly.
So, I love that people get into this hobby as much as they do, and I am into this hobby as much as any of you are. But I have done it for so long that I am now to the point where I'm like, you people are being crazy about it. And
well, I mean, take your example a little step further and be like, okay, I need perfectly timbre matched overhead and surround back speakers.
Please stop. Please stop with the aimable tweeters and wanting to have ribbon tweeters on your ceiling because you have ribbon tweeters on your fronts. You're killing me. You're not going to hear the difference. You're just not. And then, okay. And then we start talking about toe-in. We start talking about everything else, like, I can't get my two surround speakers perfectly in line with each other. Right, yeah. One's going to be like an extra 6 inches back. Shut up. It's going to be fine. You do not know how easy it is to get decent sound.
Even with the sweep test track, you're probably going to really struggle to ever hear it if you didn't know beforehand that this was the case. And then actual content, a movie or a TV show, which is not really utilizing anything besides the front speakers the majority of the time anyway, and then when it does, it's not like the entire frequency range every time.
Right. So, I will tell you that my wife came in here to vacuum, and she moved all my speakers around. And that has been a problem. The 2-channel, like we're talking about Soundstage earlier, there is a problem with my 2-channel imaging right now, and I need to go back through and reset everything up, but I just kind of eyeballed and put it back. I know she put it back in the wrong spots. I tried to fix it, but I'm pretty sure it's still wrong, and it's driving me nuts because whenever I'm watching something that's 2-channel, I'm like, it's a big gap in the middle.
But yes, for Jack, I absolutely 100% will say we could all get cheaper speakers
Yes.
and still be very happy.
Let's all talk
Especially-
about Rob speakers if we want to talk about getting cheaper speakers.
That's right. I could absolutely be happy with less expensive speakers.
It's the mental gymnastics people have to go through in order to convince themselves that they did not waste money on their overly
Right.
expensive speakers when they go to another person's house and they hear something that they're going, sounds pretty good. You can
Sounds
see on their face the blood drain when they're like, oh my God, this sounds really quite good. And then they have to start talking themselves into it. They have to.
Also, less expensive speakers properly set up versus much more expensive speakers improperly set up. I will definitely take the less expensive
Every
all day long.
time. 1,000% of the time.
No kidding.
Every time. Highly reflective room versus like a cushy couch and a couple of room treatments. You've just saved yourself $10 million in speakers.
There you go.
You put $200 worth of panels on your walls, and suddenly you can spend $1 bajillion less in speakers and have it sound better.
Yep.
David is back with his ongoing journey trying to have his Denon X4300H receiver repaired by after one of the amplifier channel blew when his APC H10 was on the fritz. He had taken it to a local repair shop that told him all multi-channel AV receivers were only built to fail, but the owner insisted on doing the repair for free anyways, and that was over 10 weeks ago now. As we speculated, when David finally heard back from the owner, he said that he was waiting for parts and that some of the transistors were currently unavailable. He once again told David that even if he repaired the blown amp channel, the rest would fail because Denon receivers are just so bad. And even when David found the supposedly unavailable transistors himself, the owner said not to invest any money on this X4300H. Or even use it strictly as a preamp because electrical current would still be going through the amplifier channels and they would all fail eventually because of that. So David has given up on that place. Just get your stuff back, my dude.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Despite not wanting to have to spend so much money right now, David decided to go with our advice, and he just bought a refurbished Denon X6700H so that he can finally use all 13 of his speakers that he already had installed. But despite the ridiculous runaround of that stereo repair shop, the owner did get in his head, and now he's thinking he doesn't want to use the amplifier channels that are built into the X6700H.
Okay, so dude, we
I don't
just
blame
gotta
you.
get.
Let me just...
I don't blame you.
I
No,
don't
no,
blame
no.
you. Somebody
gotta get
says
a
the
little
sky is
bit.
purple enough. You're going to look up at the sky and you're going to go, but is it blue? Or is
Right.
it really a little purple? It looks a little purple now that you mentioned it 7 million times. So
Sure.
yes, go on.
But David, how many Denon receivers are there out there? Old ones, 20, 30-year-old Denons that are out there, have they all failed? Because
Yes,
this
they're all
dude
failing right now.
is making it sound like, they're just the cheapest crap that's out there and they're all going to break on you. And I'm like, just do a little reset there because we all know there
not
are oodles of receivers out there, not just Denons, Onkyos and Yamahas and
I'm
Anthems and
surprised
all of them out
APC
there.
won't cover this in some way. They're supposed to do that.
I don't know, maybe never even tried. But-
I would
well,
be.
Yeah.
I would be.
Since it was giving a beep and he still had it plugged in, they were probably going to say we did warn you.
I forgot the specifics of his
Yeah.
little
But anyway,
trauma.
just please, if you're willing to be influenced by what that guy said, who I think
Just
is
keep
a jerk
rewinding
and
this part
doesn't
right now. Your Denon is
deserve
fine.
to be-
Your
yeah.
Denon is fine. Denons are great. Denon amps
right.
don't fail.
And you
Denon
know
amps don't fail.
there are a ton of Denon customers out there, and not all of their AV receiver amplifiers failed on them. Just give it enough time and they'll all fail. You know that isn't true.
That's
know
just not
it.
true. I mean, that's just not
factually
true.
not the case. Are there Denons that have failed? Yes.
Are there Onkyos that caught on fire? Also, yes.
Right.
Did they all blow up and catch on fire and burn down people's houses?
Do they all
No.
just fail when you wait long enough? No, they do not. So please, I hope we can reset you a little bit on that. Because the answer we're going to give to your question is just use some of the amplifiers that are built into your X6700H. But anyway, let's get to the actual question.
Anyways, that model has dedicated preamp mode, which Denon claims completely shuts off all of the built-in amplifiers, doesn't send any power through them at all when it's in that mode. He already has a 7-channel monolith amp on hand, which would obviously power all of his floor-level speakers. That would mean he would need 6 more channels of amplification for his 3 pairs of overhead speakers. He thought of getting 3 of the Fosse amps that we always recommend, but he doesn't have enough power outlets. Would it be okay to use a power strip and plug all that into his APC even though they warned not to do that? Or is there another smaller amplifier that could provide enough channels to power and power for a nice low price? My dude.
The amps that are built into your X6700H, yes.
Just don't. Listen, yeah. I mean...
And I mean, I'm all for using that monolith 7-channel amp that you already own. Like, even though you probably don't technically out and out need to, you already have the thing. I have mine. I don't need mine. I use mine. I would absolutely go ahead and use your monolith amplifier, but I would not set your Denon X6700H into pure preamp mode. There's no need to do that. It will absolutely be able to power 6 overhead speakers very, very nicely while your monolith powers your 7 floor level speakers. So that is absolutely the answer I would give you. Now, to answer the question as wrote, you can just take a power strip, plug a few low power devices into that, and plug that into a single outlet of your APC. Nothing is going to explode. That will work. They say not to do that because people put in like too high a power draw, like they've got all of those things, and then they end up blowing something out and they get mad. So they just, have the flat answer in the manual. Don't do that. If you don't do that, we're not going to have a problem. It's not going to be possible to have a problem. If you do try and do that, okay, there might be a problem, so we're just going to say don't do it. But, with something like this, yes, you could do it. Nothing's going to blow up. But there's no need to use the amplifiers that are built into your X6700H to power your overheads.
So he asks, is there an easy way to track the feature differences for each receiver model year? Like, if you just want to see what changed from the 4300H to the 4400 and 4500, does some site out there just have... That's not the right site.
That's not the right site, yeah.
Have a simple table or change log to quickly look that up. I'll change it. You can...
All right. Yes, so we've mentioned this website before. It's worth mentioning again, zkelectronics.com. I like using that site very much. You can plug in. They now have a compare multiple. It used to be just 2. They used to let you compare 2 AV receivers to each other at a time. Now they have a table to let you compare multiple at a time, and they do a very good job of just listing all the features. Then they have a section for what are just the differences, and then which one has the advantage, which one has the disadvantage. So it is a great way to look up and compare different AV receiver and TV models. Those are the things they do, as well as, what was the other one? Coffee makers? I think for some reason the 3 things they compare on that website are TVs, AV receivers, and coffee makers, I think. I'm not sure why.
I guess there's a lot of models out there.
That's
I guess.
Right. It's clearly what the person who runs the website is interested in.
And fair enough, man. That can't be easy to... I don't know where they grab all these stats if somebody has to plug them in manually or something like that, because something
like that. It's a big old database, but I mean, they do a good job. I haven't really been let down by them. It's espresso machines specifically, not just all coffee makers, specifically espresso machines, besides TVs and AV receivers.
Those are high-dollar units, so maybe that's why.
Right.
Martin in Ireland. Martin appreciated our discussion about Matthew Poe's video summary of the newest active room treatments for bass. Now he has a question about a different video, this time from Paul McGowan over at PS Audio. By the way, that... I'm not going to say the word that I want to say that describes this man, but that man's videos show up in my news feed relentlessly.
Sure.
Relentlessly.
Good SEO.
I wish I had the ability to get my content onto your news feed the way that this man could get his You know what I do more times than not is I look at the title of his video and then I don't, without watching the video, because God help me, I don't want to get dumber. I mean, dumb enough as it is. I take that title, I write a slightly different title, and then answer the question correctly, whatever that question was. You know, because that's how confident I am that the answer is going to be wrong.
Yep.
PS Audio. By the way, I think I passed by their headquarters, which I believe is in someplace in Boulder. I think we got lost in like an industrial park, and I was like, "Does that say PS Audio on it?" And I drove by as I drove by. I think it's in Colorado somewhere. Anyways. In the video, Paul is asked by an IT professional about his claim that he is able to hear differences between digital source devices and even digital cables, such as optical audio cables. Paul mentioned things like jitter, timing, and in particular noise. And he says that while noise in the digital signal doesn't change actual bits of data, it has huge ramification throughout sensitive electronics such as DACs and things.
That's the actual quote.
The things.
DACs and things.
It's the things.
It's the stuff. It's the things. Huge ramification.
He goes on to say how they galvanically. isolated the output stage of one of their CD player models, which made a huge difference. Is that all just a bunch of marketing BS, or is there any merit at all to what Paul is saying? You have answered your question, sir. Yeah. You have answered it. I mean, it's just... Okay, first of all, going back to when we're talking about the speaker test here, you don't need a test for huge differences. So if there were huge differences, you would not have to ask this man on the internet if it was true or not, because you would be able to just plug in a cable and go, my God, that's massive. Listen to all that noise. What does noise sound like? Do I have to tell you what noise sounds like? I mean, it sounds like noise.
In a digital signal, though, like this one specifically is about digital signals.
It makes no sense. Electrically.
One thing I really dislike online, because of course online everything is a 0 or a 100 and there's nowhere in between. There's no subtlety. But one thing I really dislike is someone who is generally on the level and generally provides pretty good advice, maybe not perfectly accurate. Of course, nobody is perfectly accurate, but generally pretty good. Like then they make one glaring error, which anybody could do, and then people go, well, because they made that one glaring error, we can't listen to anything they've ever said ever. It's all got to go. Okay, so I don't like that, and I'm not going to say that anybody should feel that way about anybody.
How can you grow as a person or as a website or as an information source if when you are presented with new data, your only reaction can be to either say it confirms what I've already said, or because it contradicts what I've said, it must be wrong.
Sure.
You cannot be an authority or an expert or a source of information if you cannot assimilate new data and say, okay, now we know this. We thought it was this before, and you can go back and look at our history on this podcast, my history on this podcast, about subwoofer placement, especially dual subwoofer placement. Mm-hmm. When the new data came out, Rob and I, Rob was talking about it, and I was like, I don't know about that. And, we were kind of went back and forth a little bit. And then as I assimilated that data and we talked more and more about it and we saw more and more what was going on and experienced it ourselves, now we make the recommendations we do. I have said on this particular podcast, I don't think there will ever be an electronic room correction program that's going to work the way that people think that room correction should work. But if it ever comes out, I will contradict myself.
We'll be happy to talk about it, too.
Yeah, I will be happy.
But see, on the flip side, you sometimes have people online or elsewhere in life where most of the time what they're saying is wrong, but of course sometimes what they're saying is right. And it's very difficult for me to say, well, we should listen to that person because once in a while something they say is right, even though most of the time what they're saying is, if not outright wrong, it's, leaning to the side of incorrect, okay? So, look, I'll have to couch this as saying it's my opinion, but I've seen enough PS audio videos with Paul McGowan in it where I go, I don't have time in my life to listen to this man say so many things that are objectively incorrect and just try to sift out the few things that are correct. It's not as though he's 100% wrong all of the time. That's absolutely not the case, but it's just I don't have time to sift through. There are other people I can listen to, like Matthew Pose, for example, where almost everything he says is bang on, and of course he's a human being and will make an error once in a while, but he's not the sort of person who won't correct himself if he wants to be right. So I just don't have time for Paul McGowan and PS Audio. If you're watching it as entertainment and just get a kick out of it, fine, but I'd put almost no stock in anything he says, even though, yes, a few correct things come out once in a while. But anyway, on the topic of, digital sending of signals, is there such a thing as noise in digital signals? Absolutely there is. There's noise and interference in any electrically sent signal. What does that end up doing? Well, in a digital signal, we're looking at a square wave. So if you have noise or interference or signal degradation, that square wave stops being square. It starts getting its corners rounded off, or some of the top gets the whole thing gets attenuated a little bit, or it might even get some squiggles in it. It actually does have some squiggles in it. It's not a perfectly square wave. But the whole point of digital signal transmission is that as long as there's a great enough difference between the peaks of that what should be a perfect square wave versus the troughs of what ideally would be a perfect square wave, as long as there's a great enough difference there, and there is a clock on either end, so the signals are supposed to be coming out at a given frequency, a solid locked frequency, and the other end, the receiving end, is supposed to be looking at that signal at that same frequency, so that you can tell, okay, is there a peak or trough now? Is there a peak or trough now? Is there a peak or trough now? And they're being sent and received at the same interval, the same frequency. As long as all of that is functioning correctly and you can tell a peak from a trough, you can round off the edges, you can attenuate, you can squiggle as much as you want, as long as you can still tell a peak from a trough. And then it is a 1 or a 0, and it really doesn't matter how much noise and interference and signal degradation there was in that until it gets so bad that you can't tell a peak from a trough anymore. And that can happen. You can get there eventually. You put enough noise into a digital signal and the receiving end just can't tell a 1 from a 0 reliably anymore, or it keeps screwing it up. It keeps saying it's a 1 when it should be a 0. That can happen. But that is not some sort of subtle difference. That is a failure outright. You will hear horrible glitching, if not outright just cutting out of the signal when you get there. And we've heard that sometimes, right? We've heard a digital signal that got corrupted and just didn't come out right anymore. Sure. It's not subtle. It's not degrees. There's no such thing as degrees in the digital signal. So this idea that you have to be worried about noise and the signal, jitter is when, or timing incongruities is when you get a slight misalignment between the sending frequency and the receiving frequency. That has been, that's been sorted out in our signals now. Like, it's just not a thing anymore that honestly comes in practical terms. It's just not a purpose. So it's marketing BS. It's nonsense. And on that one, don't listen to what he's saying. Let's move on because I don't have time for this.
Yeah. Just to go back one really quickly, the problem with trying to say, well, every once in a while this person's right, so, watch their content if you want to, is that if you are watching their content to get information, you do not have the ability to discern what is the truth versus what is the lie, or what is the
golly
the
gee,
falsehood.
Audio is the only place where that happens in life.
I know. It's great because it'd be a shame if it ever happened in something like the medical industry or having anything to do with the shape of the planet, stuff like that. That would be a real shame. But yes, so certain people like this, it's just easier. Just like APC saying don't plug a power surge protector into or a power strip into their units. It's just safer. It's just safer because you don't know what you're doing. So just stay away from these people, because if you have to ask, just go find somebody who's mostly right. And there are plenty of, we're those people, I think. I mean, I feel like we try to be, and there's lots of other people out there that are those people that we respect. And you can go out there and sometimes I don't agree with everything they say.
Well, sure.
But you at least know that if you latch on to one of the things that they say that's wrong, it's really not so horribly wrong that it's going to make you spend hundreds of thousands.
Or that the sort of person will correct themselves once they realize that they were wrong about it.
Yeah.
No.
Richard in Montreal.
Oh, we missed his second question there.
Did we? I thought I already did that.
No, we didn't do the second one. So we're still with who are we here? We got to think. Martin. Yeah. B. We didn't get B.
Oh, I thought we already did that. On another YouTube channel, there's a fellow who often replaces components in speaker crossovers. He'll often put in better capacitors or induction coils or that sort of thing, saying the original crossovers are crap. He might also replace the binding posts because the originals are crap. And then he shows before and after measurements that don't make much sense to Martin. Again, in general, is there any sort of merit to this thing? Okay, so let me give you an example from a bicycle, because I know a lot more about putting bicycles together than I do crossovers. Okay, so there's a channel that I found online that is just basically this guy going through like super expensive bicycles and tearing them apart if they're not like everything just perfectly flat and straight and level and everything else, right? But the reality is if you spend $7,000 on the bicycle frame, you should be expecting a certain level of fit and finish that's above and beyond.
You'd want it all right.
You would be shocked at how absolutely wrecked a bicycle can be and still function.
Sure,
Like it is insane. I've had people come in, I've seen bicycles come in where you take the back wheel off just to change the tube in the tire, and the axle falls out because it's broken in half. Okay? It is literally broken in half. These people had no idea they had broken axle. And that's how messed up a bicycle can be and still operate, right? So is this person correct in that they are swapping out less quality components for greater quality components? Sure. The answer is almost certainly yes. I don't see any reason why that wouldn't be true. Is that going to make any audible difference? I cannot see a world in which this is
well, I mean, unless you change the values, right? If you change the values of the capacitors and inductors
but then
and resistors,
God knows what you're doing to the speaker if you're not the speaker designer, right?
That's right. Yeah.
So you actually could be changing the frequency response to be worse than it was before, or at least less linear than it was before, and definitely outside of what the designer wanted that speaker to sound like. So if you're swapping like for like, like Rob said, same values, it should sound the same. Are they better capacitors? Are they going to last longer? Are they going to be less likely to fail? Are they made out of better components? Are the 5-way binding posts better? Is all that stuff? Yes, it's all better stuff. It's going to sound the same. Absolutely, it's going to sound exactly the same.
The sort of general rule of thumb when it comes to electronic components is what does better mean? It's usually just that they can operate at a higher temperature for a longer amount of time before they fail. That's mostly what you're paying for with a more expensive capacitor or inductor, right? Unless you're changing the value. Mostly what you're paying for is one that can just continue to operate at a higher temperature before it fails, before it dies. That is predominantly the difference when it comes to quality between things. There can also be in terms of tolerance, right? You'll have a marked value in terms of, how many picofarads or how many ohms if it's a resistor, whatever it is, right? They'll have a marked value, and then there'll be a tolerance. A plus minus percentage. How close is it actually to that marked value, and how much above or below might it vary, throughout its operational life? So you can have the ones that are a tighter tolerance, and those will cost more. So those types of things, absolutely, you can replace all of those electrical components inside of a speaker crossover that uses a passive crossover with ones that are tighter tolerance, operate at higher temperature, have a longer expected life. That all of that can be absolutely true. But if all the values were the same, the measured frequency response that comes out at the end ought to be virtually identical. And if he's showing significant differences in the frequency response after doing this, he's changing the values. I haven't watched these videos. I don't know, but that would be what's going on. If there are significant measured frequency response differences after these component changes, it means he's changing the values, which we would expect there then to be frequency response differences.
Yeah. Not. So is there merit? I mean, if you like spending money, I guess. I mean, it's going to void your warranty on those speakers. So if something does go wrong with them, they're going to say, well, who messed with this crossover? And you're like, oh, well, I upgraded it. And they're like, oh, well. Richard in Montreal. We previously spent a good chunk of time discussing Richard's basement plans. It included a small enclosed room as a dedicated home gym, while placing the theater area out in the open portion of the basement, taking up the left side of the basement, while a bar and the game area over to the right. We covered several topics. And now Richard is back with some clarifications and more questions. This is the guy we thought he should put it in the gym, but it doesn't look
We thought he should put it in the gym, but then we went on to say, okay, we just have to set realistic expectations for if it is going to be in the open room. That's all.
We talked at length about using the small enclosed room for the theater instead of the gym, and Daz even wrote in to try to encourage the same thing based on his own experience in a similar basement setup, but Richard and his wife really do use their gym equipment daily, and the home gym is actually a higher priority for them. Fair enough.
That's right.
Believe me, I've just seen too many absolutely disused gym setups for me to say. But if you'd use it, have at it.
That's right.
We've had a lot of warnings for him regarding soundproofing, but he actually really enjoyed and appreciated our discussion. He wants to assure us that the plan was always address the entire basement ceiling, not just the portion that is above the theater area, and he fully understands that containing the base, in particular, would simply require a much more extensive renovation than they want to pay for. Rest assured, his expectations are now set appropriately. Great. So we're not talking about soundproofing, we're talking about sound mitigation. So he's pretty happy with their plan to fill all of the ceiling joist space with insulation, then install resilient channels and hang 5/8" drywall on that resilient channel. He's well aware of how improper installation can easily short-circuit the resilient channel. He specifically went with a contractor who addressed those concerns, but he'll still watch them like a hawk during installation, as we recommend. Boy, let me tell you something about watching them like a hawk. I don't know what I'm looking at. So, as much as I think it's important that somebody watch them like a hawk, I would definitely want to know what I'm looking at. So do some research first. That's all.
Installing drywall on resilient channel, it just means they really are going in straight lines, and those screws are not venturing off to either side.
Yeah,
and,
that's fine.
Clearly not going into the resilient channel anymore. Yeah.
So his last question about the ceiling soundproofing is whether we think Sonopan would be worthwhile. The Sonopan marketing makes claims about being even more effective than green glue. What's our take?
So I know about Sonopan. They're actually a Canadian company.
Ooh.
Sonopan is just soundboard. All right, it's remarketed. They colored it green, but it's just soundboard, and soundboard is just glued together cardboard. That's what soundboard is. And they did this whole thing where they put dimples in it and colored it green to make it their own thing, but it's soundboard. So soundproofingcompany.com has a whole article about soundboard, what it can do, what it can't do. To make soundboard effective, what you actually need to do is attach the soundboard layer to your studs or your resilient channel or sound clips and hat channels, and then screw the drywall only into the soundboard, not even into the whatever is holding the soundboard onto it, which I would never want to use on a ceiling, because soundboard is glued together cardboard, and it's just on a wall, not so bad, but I wouldn't want to use it for a ceiling construction. I'd want the screws holding the drywall on the outside to be going into that resilient channel and not only being held by the soundboard. In terms of soundproofing, it's quite effective through the vocal range, and that's what it's for. It's for the vocal range, and it's quite effective at it because it's got a little bit of its own damping since it's glued together cardboard, but it doesn't provide a lot of extra mass because it is just physically lighter. It doesn't really provide true decoupling, although it provides a little bit of damping. It doesn't act as insulation. So, I mean, out of all the things that you can genuinely do with soundproofing is just providing a little bit of damping, and it's effective primarily in the vocal range, which a lot of people notice, right? You use soundboard versus no soundboard in an apartment, and you can still hear that people are talking, but it's a little bit more muffled, right? Which is, noticeable, and people appreciate it, but it doesn't do anything for your bass. It's not as effective as 2 layers of drywall with green glue in between, because that adds a considerable more amount of mass via the second layer of drywall, and the green glue is a better damper than soundboard is. So I don't really recommend Sonopan. I don't really recommend soundboard for a home theater, because it doesn't really address the things that we're wanting to do. You'd be better off, if you're going to spend that money, on just putting up a second layer of drywall. That would do more for you.
All right. For his dual subwoofers, he liked a lot of our suggestions. He'll be aiming for a pair of cylinder subs, and he's very much open to using a wireless subwoofer kit for the signal, but he'd still like to pre-wire for a couple of subwoofer connections, and he likes the idea that Rob floated of putting them basically in the 2 side walls. Is it okay to use RCA wall plates, or should the wire come directly out of the wall? And which wires would we recommend that he can buy in Canada? The wire path will be between within the ceiling and down the walls. Mm-hmm. So I wrote an article about in-wall cabling recently, and I'll link it up here, but you want to get, I think it's CL2 or greater, and There's a whole bunch of them out there. There's like the CL2X, CL3, CL4, whatever, and there's what do they call it, riser or something, or plenum
rated,
and then which you don't need, but is often included in these things.
Plenum is if you're putting a wire inside of an HVAC duct.
Which
this is all about fire safety.
Yeah.
All the in-wall stuff is about fire safety. Plenum rating means if it did catch on fire and it's inside of an HVAC duct, the gases that it gives off will not be toxic.
Yeah. And as far as the RCA plate, perfectly fine.
Absolutely fine for a subwoofer connection. So I would go ahead, do a RCA subwoofer plate, wall plate for that. And then in Canada, I can put you to primecables.ca. And since it's a .ca, it really is Canadian. They have CL2 rated RCA cables. They've got a CL2 rated in-wall rated jacket. They have lengths, any length you could want from 3 feet to 100 feet. I'm pretty sure that's going to cover what distance you might need to cover in this room. And the most expensive, the 100-foot one is $58. So they're not charging crazy overrated prices or something like that. Perfectly reasonable prices, has the in-wall rating you need. And yeah, there you go. Primecables.ca has what you need.
So there you go. Yeah. And I addressed the CL2 and the plenum and all that stuff in that article. So that'll give you something to read. We had suggested going with an acoustically transparent projection screen setup, but when he mentioned the 98-inch TCL TV or putting up an 85-inch TV on an articulating mount, he knew right away they prefer going that route. But when we mentioned that. So that's the plan. That's fine. We talked a bit about viewing angle and also about the pitfalls of having the seats pushed right back against the wall. They're open to pulling the seats forward a bit. How much space from the back wall to the seats would be best? They were originally going to be about 10 feet from ISO screen with a wall-mounted flat panel and the seats pushed back. I like 18 inches back there, to be honest with you. I think that gives you enough room to like actually get back there if you want to. And I mean, for me, like, it's funny how like easy it is just to like throw things over the back of your couch and have like blankets, and they're just back there, and then you reach over and you grab it and you throw it back over, that sort of thing. 18 inches also gives you plenty of room to put a speaker on a wall mounted or wall mounted
without it being
shelf
right by your ear.
So I like 18 inches personally, if you can do that.
Yeah, I mean, I can say ideally you'd have 3 feet or more, but that's not so realistic, in this with the room. They're not going to do that. So yeah, I mean, I would say try to do at least a foot. If this is ideally we'd have it as far back as we can, but for these reasons we're willing to move it a little bit forward. I would try to do at least a foot, but yeah, I like Tom's answer. 18 inches sounds great to me.
We said to forget about surround back speakers in this setup and forget about Atmos speakers too. Just stick with 5.2, we said. And he's actually on board with that. But just for the sake of argument, he could install just one pair of top middle speakers without the overhead soffit getting in the way and still maintaining distance between his surround speakers and the top middle speakers like Tom recommends on AV Gadgets. Does that maybe change our views about Atmos in this setup at all? I mean, it doesn't, but if you're going to do it, that's what I would do.
Well, and given the time with everything being down now, everything demolished, I'm showing the pictures of the before just so we have an idea of his room. But, with everything demolished, I mean, if you're going to run some pre-wire speaker wire and that doesn't have to cost very much, I'm not against you doing that. They might end up being your in-ceiling surround speakers at some point, if you want to end up going that route, and that would be perfectly fine. So I'm not going to tell you not to do that. I'm perfectly fine pre-wiring for that, but ultimately I would still run a 5.2 setup in this room. That would be what I would do.
Yeah. So yes, you could put speakers up there and try them out, and then just buy cheap. Just buy cheap stuff. Which in-wall rated speaker wire can we point to in Canada? Rob's got a recommendation there, since he's in Canada.
Again, still sticking with Prime Cable, so you can order this at the same time. In-wall rated goes for about 50 cents a foot, which in Canada is pretty reasonable. Now, I'm going to just point you at their 14 gauge because none of the distances that you're talking about in this room require 12 gauge cable. 14 gauge is that little bit thinner, little bit flexible, more easier to work with, and the price is absolutely right. So again, CL2 rated, you just get a big spool of their 14 gauge in-wall rated wire.
Yeah, I agree with that. We basically talked him into putting the gear either below the TV or just over to the right on the other side of the support column. Both areas will have custom cabinetry built in. Which location do we think is better, and how should he address ventilation and cooling? I don't think either one of them is necessarily better. I mean, I he's talking about to the other side of the support column at the front of the room.
Yeah, at the front of the room. So you can sort of see that there's going to be space underneath where the TV goes, and then there's a support column on the right-hand side of the TV, and then there's a little bit of extra space beside that where they're planning to put in another closet cabinet.
The beside the support column, because you have floor to ceiling theoretically. Like, just let that be your entire thing, and then you can use like AC Infinity or whatever fan solutions if you're handy. You want to have ventilation going, and then you have the side wall of that where you can have like some ventilation going and pulling air through. For me, that makes the most sense. You can have custom rack in there, like a rack that
You could,
17 inches wide. Or
it also,
like
your sources you can keep more at like standing height instead of having to bend down under the TV to put a disc in.
Yeah.
That type of thing. However, I don't know. It seemed like they had some plans for these things. So if it's just like what's the most out of the way, then that would be underneath. And I mean, again, the AC Infinity fans, like as long as you have some louvered doors on the front, then you can get the ones that blow the hot air out the front, because AC Infinity has designs that blow the hot air out the back, out the top, or out the front. So you can get the ones that just blow the air out the front, and that's enough, because like you're not going to be driving anything ridiculously hard in this setup. So as long as you can circulate the air, that's all you really need. As long as you put louvered doors on the front of these cabinets, I think you can get away with just about anything.
Yeah, or speaker grill cloth or something like that. Whatever it is that you want. Infinite Gary, we mentioned how a lot of Harman's listening tests regarding speaker preference have been conducted using just a single speaker in mono. But what about stereo imaging? Is it safe to assume that the speaker that is most preferred in mono will also produce the best imaging once it's used in the stereo pair? Or could there be cases where a given speaker scores lower in mono but actually images better once you're using it with its mate in stereo? I don't think that a mono test tells you a single thing about how it performs in stereo. At least for me, I don't see how it could. The idea is that you're taking two speakers and trying to compare them against each other is why you have the mono test. It doesn't tell you, I mean, unless you're doing off-axis tests as well, it doesn't tell you anything about how they act off-axis. It doesn't tell you how wide the soundstage is going to be, or how good the imaging is going to be, or the delineation. It does delineation maybe. It can maybe tell you something about delineation, but the rest of it doesn't tell you anything. We're just trying to differentiate between two speakers. That's what the mono test is for. Like this speaker is different than this speaker, and I prefer one over the other. That's what it's trying to test.
Yeah, I mean, one of the quirks of a lot of that published Harman research anyway is that they are predominantly done with like an audience, like more than one listener. So I mean, you easily run into the situation where in those tests in mono, the magnaplanar or the electrostatic speakers end up scoring kind of low because they have very narrow off-axis dispersion, which in general Harman's research has said no, it should be wide even dispersion, and the magnaplanars or the electrostatics are the opposite of that. But if you are the single and only listener and you put them in stereo, you end up with this experience that's like almost like headphones. You can get that holographic stereo imaging that virtually no other speakers can match, and yet in the preference score in the mono test, they end up scoring very low because they have very narrow dispersion that a wide seating audience just doesn't appreciate. So yeah, I think in terms of specifically stereo imaging, in particular with a single listener or a very small audience, there could definitely be different preferences that come out of a differently held test.
Yeah. Chris, how are we doing time-wise? I don't know when we started. Chris really wants to get a 65-inch OLED for gaming. He has both of the latest consoles, as well as a gaming PC with HDMI 2.1. He noticed that Vizio has their 65-inch OLED at a tempting price that is lower than the LG OLEDs, and it seems to have all the important gaming features. Any reason to avoid it and pay more for an LG? I don't know.
So, I mean, this is a little bit one where if I go strictly by the tech specs, it's almost harder to argue. Now, the one that I can clearly say is the LGs will have 4 HDMI 2.1 inputs. You've got 3 HDMI 2.1 sources. And we know coming up in his second question that his sound system isn't going to be passing through any HDMI 2.1 sources or acting as an HDMI 2.1 switch. So strictly from you can plug all 3 in and still have the eARC port left free, the LG has an advantage there because the Vizio only has 2 HDMI 2.1 ports on it. But just sort of in general stability, the LGs are significantly higher than the Vizios. The Vizio has had a lot of just like glitches in its system. There's been plenty of reports where it's, particularly if you're trying to use any of the streaming services, which maybe you aren't because you've got all these sources plugged into it. But it's just, a lot of sort of glitchiness. In general, just the brightness, the LGs are brighter. When it comes to the stability of the VRR, the LGs are that little bit better. So like my whole feeling is, I think in this case, it's worth just going ahead and getting the LG. Vizio only ever stuck with OLED for one model year, and they've never updated since then. And it's kind of going back to, I think it was either the C9 or the CX era. I think it must have been the CX era because they were doing the 4K 120. So yeah, I would go with the LG. That's just my advice. I think you'll just end up happier overall with the overall stability and support in the 4 HDMI 2.1 ports.
So he will almost certainly use a soundbar and likes the Vizio option that Rob always recommends, but if he wants all the best gaming features, he's going to need to use the HDMI ARC connection, right? Any reason why that wouldn't work correctly? Any reason? There's never a reason why it doesn't work correctly. Will it work correctly? Your guess is as good as mine, Haas. Yeah. So, yeah, it should work. It should work. Plugging all your games in your PC directly into your LG OLED and then using that last fourth ARC port don't set
to send the signal.
Don't set your Xbox to DTS.
Well, this is the thing. I actually wanted specifically to mention DTS because, again, a price thing, since he's looking at prices, clearly there are still like C2 models that are available, and they're cheaper than the new C3. If you're using any of your sources as a Blu-ray disc player, be aware that the C3s will now pass through the DTS signal to your soundbar, which that Vizio soundbar that I recommend does decode DTS as well as Dolby Atmos. So if you want to do that, that would be the reason to consider actually getting the brand new C3, because it does finally restore DTS audio pass-through. However, if you're not using it as a Blu-ray player and you're only ever using streaming services and games, then go ahead and get last year's C2 at the discounted price because Dolby signals go through just fine.
Yeah. I guess I could, if you're really worried about ARC and all of that, you can make a bit of an argument for the Vizio in that if you're going to get a Vizio soundbar, it's most likely to work best with a Vizio TV, but I would. That's like, that's so wishful thinking on my part that I hesitate to even mention it because I don't think that that's true. I think
that might have been in his mind too.
Yeah.
I don't buy into that at all. In this case.
I know that I've had people who have had Samsung. Like TV, Samsung player, and Samsung, and it worked really well together. But that's like an N of one, right? It doesn't really tell you much. So we'll do one more question, then we'll be done. Gav in Canberra, Australia. It seems as though we generally do not recommend upward firing Atmos modules, but despite that, he went ahead and got a pair of Elax Atmos modules and added them to his 24-year-old Yamo 5.1 speaker setup using his Marantz Slimline NR1711 receiver. He tried the virtual front height speaker processing before, but he was pleasantly surprised by the audible difference and improvement that upward firing Elax provided. Then just recently, an Australia retailer addicted to audio ran a sale on Q acoustic speakers. They even did free shipping, which is almost unheard of in Australia, so shout out to them. He picked up some Q3030s with a matching Q3090 center, and he thinks they sound way better than his aging Yamos. The thing is, now those upward-firing Elax sound underwhelming. He used to always prefer to upmix all content with his old speakers, but now he's finding he prefers to listen to 2-channel content in just stereo listening mode, and 5.1 content just played in the straight decoding mode, no upmixing. He's just curious to hear our thoughts about why the upward-firing Atmos modules seem to enhance his old Yamo speaker significantly, but now he has better-sounding Q acoustic speakers. They're underwhelming. I mean, there are just so many reasons why this might be the case. But I like... so I'm going to link up my article on placing Atmos modules, okay? And they are so finicky for placement to get them right that I would venture to bet that if you did anything different in placing them from the Yamos...
He did say he got new stands to go along with the Q acoustics.
From the Yamos to the Q acoustics, I mean, height difference, they're a little bit more farther forward, they're a little bit wider. Anything, I think, could significantly change how effective they sound to you. So that would be my first, and that was my very first thought here. I do not think the timbre match between these two different speakers, the Q acoustics, or the quality between the Q acoustics and the Yamo, should be playing a part here. It could. I don't think it would. I think that the Atmos modules themselves are in a completely, they're just kind of a standalone thing that doesn't really need to timbre match with the speaker upon which they sit. So my guess is they're placed slightly differently. They're higher, they're more forward, they're more wide. There's something going on differently there, and that's why you think they don't sound as good.
Now, I mean, Yamo in general has all along made pretty decent speakers. Yeah. So, even they're, 20 years old or whatever it is, I'm not looking at that and going, oh, well, you had, really clearly crappy speakers before, so it's just that the new ones have much better imaging on their own, and that accounts for it 100%. I wouldn't necessarily guess that with anything that's a Yamo speaker setup, because they've been pretty good all along. Is it possible that one of the 24-year-old Yamo speakers, actually had a blown driver or something like that? This is not completely out of the question, but I think it's almost, harkening back to what we talked about, mono versus stereo versus surround sound listening. Like, the more speakers you add, the more difficult it becomes to tell the quality of those speakers apart. Just the more sound and sound sources coming at us, the more our brain just kind of goes, yeah, that all just kind of sounds good to me now. And even though if I had listened to, speaker A versus speaker B in mono, I might be able to say I definitely prefer one over the other. As soon as I've got 7 of them all firing at me, it's like, yeah, hearing the differences between them starts to become more difficult. So if it's just a pure quality difference, I mean, maybe this was like a little compact Yamo 5.1 speaker package. I'm not exactly sure, right? Yeah. He just said he had a 5.1 Yamo speaker setup. So there could be significant performance differences. It's not out of the question, because Yamo did have some nice little compact 5.1 speaker packages that they sold at one time. So that could explain it in my mind. Just having the preponderance of more sound tends to like fool our brain into just thinking, yeah, that all starts to sound pretty darn good now. So it could be as simple as that. Maybe your new Q acoustics really do just have significantly better imaging of their own, and so adding those upward firing speakers isn't really enhancing the sound the way that adding it to the Yamo speakers of old used to.
Yeah, and again, with placement and toe in and a whole bunch of other things that could be playing a part here, it's hard. It's very hard in the home theater environment to change one thing.
It is. Well, I mean, he's got a Marantz receiver. He got new speakers. He probably reran Odyssey. Yeah, I would hope so. Could there have been a difference in the way things were set up in the Odyssey auto setup?
How he had his initial speaker set up, he might have just taken the other speakers and plopped them in the exact same location and said, well, I'm done. And that could be making a difference too. So there's a lot of stuff that could be going on here.
Yes, there are many variables at play here.
The fact that you don't that they're not working as good for you right now, you could do one of two things. You can keep experimenting with them until you decide this is not worth it anymore. This is not worth my time, and sell them. Or you can just have them there for those times when you're like, well, I'm going to, there's an Atmos soundtrack. I'm going to give it another try. So this
could also be a little bit closer to how we, Tom and I have been saying all along, we don't really like even not just upward firing Atmos speakers installed in the ceiling or hanging on the ceiling or the walls. Like, we've been like, maybe they add a little something, but like, we're not like, you gotta have them. Yeah. We've never been. But also, Tom and I have also always used very good speakers for our floor level speakers. We've never not had very good speakers on our floor level. And maybe it's just the case that, well, if you have really good speakers on the floor level and they image really well already, those Atmos speakers, what they add is not tremendously significant.
Yeah.
Could be that.
I agree. So he's got his Marantz Slimline receiver, 3 4K video sources, and a Hisense TV from 2016 that only has 2 HDMI 2.1 ports and 2 HDMI 1.4 ports.
2.0 ports.
I'm sorry, 2.0.
No 2.1s.
I'm sorry, 2.0. Sorry. He started getting video glitches with a snowy screen sometimes, or the occasional black screen, everything turning green for a moment. Long story short, the problem seems to have been the HDMI port on his Hisense TV. Once he plugged the output from his Marantz into the only other HDMI 2.0 port on his TV, everything worked fine again. But he had tried a bunch of cable swapping beforehand, and now the first HDMI 2.1 port on his TV is really problematic, with much more frequent glitches. Could the changing of the HDMI cables have dealt the final blow to that HDMI port on his TV? Is there anything he could do to get it working again? Anything he can do to prevent his second and last HDMI 2.0 port on his TV from also dying? He's really hoping to get a couple more years out of this TV before upgrading again. If that second port dies, is there any way to send 4K to that TV? Could have plugging and unplugging the HDMI cables in and out of a port that was already problematic have made it worse? I don't know. Maybe. Could be.
Oh, yes.
I mean,
if there was a connection starting to come loose, then friction fitting things in multiple times can definitely make it come a little looser.
But if it's something else that's making it go bad, it was just going bad over time anyways. And the fact that you were changing cables, it was just something you were doing while that time was passing. That's all. So
that's true.
That doesn't necessarily mean that the second port is going to go for you, or that the second port is going to be safe. We have no idea. There is nothing that I can think of that you can do other than just leaving it alone and not changing cables a whole bunch of times.
The only thing you could do would be going for a repair, where they either repair
but
the
it's not going to be
HDMI.
worth it. What's his name? Jack has got a place you guys can go to.
Stereo repair shop is going to tell you that every TV
Every
is
TV
garbage.
is meant
they
to
all
is
fail.
garbage. Yes.
Every single just
CRT is the way to go.
Right, I'm sure. No, it's got to be a triple tube CRT projector. That's the only type of displays we can use around here. Yes. So short of just having it repaired, I don't see any way that you can change a setting and bring your HDMI 2 port back to life. It's not going to be that type of thing. I would just kind of cross my fingers if you're not going to go looking for a repair. I mean, you could contact Hisense and see if they have anything to say. I wouldn't expect a reply back from them, to be honest, but it just sort of cross your fingers on that one. If you end up kind of needing to buy a new TV, not the worst thing in the world. There are definitely TVs that have improved upon the performance of the one that you're using with your Hisense there. So I can kind of look at that as a good excuse if it comes to that. But yeah, I think you're kind of just stuck using that second and last HDMI 2.0 port for now. You can technically send a 4K resolution signal through an HDMI 1.4 port. That is a resolution that's supported, I think, at 4K 30. I'm not sure if 1.4 had enough bandwidth to actually go to 4K 60, but not with HDR. You definitely won't be getting HDR if you were doing that. And just the HDCP, the copy protection, might be a thing that goes on with that too. So, I mean, technically, Monoprice still has their HDCP 2.0 to 1.4 converters. So if that's the problem, is the copy protection, there is a little dongle you could add to get around to that. And I think you could be putting 4K 30 into one of those HDMI 1.4 ports if you were to go through all of that hassle. But you would definitely lose HDR if you did that. So I think it's a matter of crossing your fingers for the most part and just continuing to use that second and last 2.0 port.
That's unfortunate, but it is.
It is a bit.
It is what it is. It might be time to. I'd start saving for a TV now.
Yeah.
Now. Yeah. Who do we got left? I know we have a couple of long questions left.
Yeah, we got Greg and Dan. Dan is the long one there. Andrew from AV Gadgets and Nathan. They are on the list for next week.
All right. I want to thank our listeners of the week. We want to thank Raph and Micah for going to avrant.com, click on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link and sending us a PayPal donation, as well as our 137 patrons over at patreon.com.
That is right, Raph and Micah. Thank you very much for the PayPal donations that you sent, and patreon.com/AVRant podcast is where you can go to sign up to make an automatic monthly donation. So a big thanks to our 137 patrons over there.
So we also want to thank those who sent us notes of gratitude, including David, Martin, Richard, Chris, Scott, Gav, and Dan. Thank you for thanking us.
That is right. I'll say the names one more time. David, Martin, Richard, Chris, Scott, Gav, and Dan. Thank you all very much for thanking us. Your notes of encouragement are appreciated, and a big, big thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions.
And if you want to get your question answered, all you have to do is ask. You ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. For AVRant, I'm Tom Andry.
And I'm Rob H. Now stay in and listen to something.
Want your question answered? Send it to question@avrant.com. This is AVRant.
Now go out and listen to something.